Is that a grocery store or a garden center? Today, let's talk about growing vegetables from kitchen scraps. Here are some of the vegetables that I've collected from my store, and I'm going to show you each type and how best to grow them. Selecting vegetables at your grocer to regrow, you're going to focus on slightly different things than you would if you were selecting an item to eat. One of the things is its root base. So scallions or green onions typically have the roots intact. So when you're looking at these, you want to make sure that the roots look healthy, they don't have any browning, and you see little ones starting to come up along with some established ones. So I'm just going to take these 3 scallions and I'm going to lay them on my cutting board. I'm going to take a clean sharp knife and I'm going to cut the base roughly 2 inches from the very bottom. So all these greens now I can dice up and use in my food. If you do this consistently, you are always going to have a fresh supply of scallions or green onions to use for cooking, and you won't have to buy them ever again. So now that we have our parts, we're going to go ahead and take a dish and we're going to place our scallions in it. Besides growing scallions this way, you can also grow leeks in the same fashion. Moving on, we're going to go to garlic. Now, most often when you buy garlics, you're going to buy a whole head of garlic and it's going to have its root base intact. And you're going to think, oh, it's perfect for growing. And you're on the right track, but not exactly. What you actually want to do is you want to separate a single clove from your garlic. But counterintuitively, you're going to actually want to use the smaller cloves for cooking and reserve these nice large cloves for growing. This is going to give you a better base for your plant to grow. So I like to peel all the paper off. I have seen people say that peeling the paper isn't that necessary. If you're going to go ahead and plant it directly into soil, you probably don't need to remove the paper, but I'm going to start mine in water. So this is where my plant is going to grow out, and then this rougher, flatter end is where the roots are going to come. So I want to make sure to place the flat part on the bottom where the water is going to come in contact with my garlic clove, and make sure that this top section stays nice and dry. So again, I'm going to go ahead and place that in my cup with my scallions. Another plant along with those type of varieties is onions. This works well for white onions, yellow onions, or red onions. It doesn't really matter because they all have the same basic structure. You have your onion bulb with the rooted bottom and then the pointy top where the plant is going to grow. I'm just going to go ahead and cut off the bottom section of my onion. If you look into this and you just see a solid section, then you've probably cut too far and it probably won't root. And we have the root section intact. Yes, it's dry, it's crinkly, it doesn't look good at all. Don't worry about that. It should produce new roots for you. Again, I'm going to take my cup with my scallions and my garlic and go ahead and place my onion part in there. So I'm going to go ahead and put some water in here. The water I'm using is our tap water that got filtered so that there's no chlorine in it. We just reuse this jug for that purpose. So when I poured my water in there, I wanted to try to avoid getting water on any of the top surfaces of my plants. As it gets along into the process of regrowing its roots, you want to be more critical that you keep the top portion dry. Another thing is you're probably going to want to clean your water dish out each day and then replacing your plant material and refilling it with fresh water. One of the things that I've noticed lots of the you can grow garden scrap tutorials are showing is regrowing carrots. This, along with beets and turnips and parsnips, is a half-truth. This is going to grow plant material for you, but only from the top. It's not going to regrow the taproot, such as the edible part of a carrot, a beet, a turnip, or a parsnip. It's just going to grow greens for you, which is perfectly fine. If you've ever eaten any of the greens, you may find they're quite enjoyable. I really like the greens from carrots, and lots of other things like greens from carrots, like chickens. So if you raise chickens, this could be a cost-effective way of growing some fresh food for them. So I've cut about 1 inch off of the top of my carrot And I really didn't need that much, but I find if you have a good amount of base, this helps, again, keep that top portion out of the water while your bottom portion is submerged. Again, I'm going to have a shallow dish, and I'm just going to set that in there and fill it again with my water. So I put my level of water roughly halfway up the portion of my cut carrot, but I've done some research on the greens of these type of vegetables, and they have lots of the nutrients that you would find in the carrot and a higher percentage in the greens. Next up is celery. Now this celery is looking a little sad. If you notice, the base part here where the roots should be growing is starting to decay already, and that's because I've had it in my crisper a little too long. This extra material here that's starting to look a little sad, I'm just going to go ahead and pull that off. I am going to cut about 2 inches, I think would be a good amount for celery. So again, I can make sure that my roots are nice and moist, but the top section is going to be nice and dry, so that way I don't have any of that mold or bacteria growth. This section we're going to put into our water. Now, I was going to share the water with my carrot with this one, but because my base is looking a little questionable, I don't want to perhaps cause an issue for my carrot growth. So I'm going to put this in its own dish. I only want my water level to come up this high. I don't want it to get into the base part of my actual celery. Next on my list is lettuce. I want to remove this core in a similar fashion to how I would remove a sprouted onion, making sure that the interior mini plant is still in contact. So I make sure my flat end is on my cutting board. I grasp my head of lettuce firmly, smash, and then I can grab this, push some of those leaves away from the base with my thumb, and ta-da! That's what I wanted. Perfect. I'm glad that worked. So you can see here, let's remove a little bit of these base parts. I have the core of the little tiny baby lettuce plant in there. So because this base of this lettuce looks so unwell, I'm gonna try to cheat by doing a very thin slice to try to get some of that material off there. And I'm gonna go ahead, as I have with the other things, get my dish, put my lettuce in there. I only want the water to come up just like to there. I don't want it to go too far on this because I've had lots of problems regrowing lettuce with moisture getting too far up on my plant. This technique should work equally well whether it be iceberg, romaine, red leaf. You just need to make sure that you have the core still intact and not just individual leaves of lettuce. Next up is cabbage. This happens to be a red cabbage. Anyway, I just pulled that leaf off because it was looking a little sad. But again, it's another plant with a base. So you would either cut away the core or just take a slice off. For this, I'm actually going to set it down, use my knife, and I'm going to cut angled inward around that core piece to try to reserve as much of that center material as possible. Cabbage leaves are tougher than lettuce leaves, so be careful when you're doing this that you don't inadvertently cut yourself. I may or may not have been speaking from experience. All right, so I removed my core. I didn't get all the way to the top, but I do believe I have plenty of space here for new growth to come out. I can see that what I thought might have been issues with the base are actually roots that have already started to grow. Place root side down and go ahead and fill the base with water. Now I only want my water to come about this high up. Just like with my other plants, I want to make sure that I change out this water daily. Next up are some plants that we're going to grow directly in dirt. One of those are standard potatoes. As you can see, this potato is already starting to sprout out of its eyes. The eyes are the little indentations or divots in a potato. And once it's been sitting around for a while, it'll actually start to sprout out and put these little green nubbins out of the eyes. And that is the new plant growth. I'm going to investigate my potato and see where the most of the new growth is coming out, and that is going to be the top side of my potato. If I have a larger potato and I see these growths coming out in various sections, I can go ahead and cut my potato so that way I have at least 3 of these per section. If you do decide to go ahead and cut your potato into sections, you want to sit those in a tray and let them air dry for a couple of days up to a week. And what you want to do is make sure that the cut section is not moist, that it kind of forms a skin over that. That is really going to be helpful to avoid degradation of your potato and rot, so that way it has the best chance to grow. As this one is rather small, I'm just going to go ahead and plant this directly into the soil. Another kitchen scrap that you can grow directly into dirt is ginger. Ideally, when you are looking for ginger to grow, you want to look at these little pointy parts here. See how these are all dry and crinkled, but this one in particular right there, hopefully you can see it, is nice and comes to a sharp point. That's an indication that new plant growth is going to start at that area. So this particular thumb of ginger has a part there and a part there that looks ready to grow. Use the rest for culinary purposes and regrow that by placing it horizontally, just like this, in a large, shallow portion of dirt. The reason being is that ginger grows horizontally as a rhizome. So it's going to continue from this cut end and continue its growth pattern out that direction. Our last contestant is probably one of a family favorite, and that is a sweet potato. Now, this sweet potato might look a little paler than the ones you're used to finding at the store, and that's because I just harvested this one from our own garden. So if you've already sprouted and have vines coming out, also known as slips, then that potato can just go in the ground right away. But this one is not, so I'm going to start it in water. Basically, you want to investigate your potato, and where it has the most of these eyes or these little divots is going to be the top section that you grow, and the one that has less is going to be where the roots are going to come out. I'm looking at this one and I'm seeing pretty much an equal distribution of eyes on both ends. So that puts me in a bit of quandary. Looking at its development, I'm thinking this is probably the root side and this is the growth side, but because I can't tell, I'm gonna try something and I'm just gonna cut it in half. And I'm going to put both ends in the water and see what happens. I also have another smaller sweet potato that I'm going to do uncut. So here is another sample from my collection. This was just a much smaller one. And as you can see, this section is more rounded and this section is more pointy. And most of the tutorials I've seen, the pointy end is what's actually going to go in the water, and the rounded end is where your slips are going to grow. So I'm just going to cut off this extra stuff here. You're also going to need toothpicks for this because you want to suspend your sweet potato into water. So 3 toothpicks per sweet potato part. And then I have my glass. These are full-size glasses. It's a little overkill, but I don't have any more of the little half glasses. Basically, you want a glass depth that you can have the base portion of your sweet potato submerged and the top out of water. And I'm just gonna stick toothpicks. Did you ever do this as you were a kid? I did, but I don't remember it being an actual project. So I filled my glass of water so that the bottom section of my sweet potato is submerged. Okay, so here are my test subjects for the interior growth period in the water. I'm gonna go ahead and place these over in area that I have grow lights, so that way they get enough light. If you have a nice sunny window and you don't have a bunch of cats in your house like we do, that would be a perfect place to place these as well. I will be back with their progress once I have something to show. I'm back with my sweet potato, and as you can see, something has finally happened. Now, this took a lot longer than I was anticipating, but it's still only been a couple of weeks. What I did notice right away is that this root growth, basically what you see now, pretty much came out immediately, and that was really exciting. And then I got all these little nodules on the base that were hopeful to me that something was going to sprout. But then I waited, and then I waited, And then I waited some more. And then finally one morning, bling, these guys showed up. And these are the beginning of what are known as slips. This is what you need in order to grow sweet potatoes. Unlike white potatoes, you just plant the whole potato. So I'm going to let these grow a little bit more and then I'll be ready to plant. All right, we're back with our sweet potatoes. And if you recall, this is the one that I showed you earlier that had just the little tiny slips that were starting to grow. Look at how gorgeous they are now. And check out these roots. That is a pretty significant amount of root development. So this I can plant in the ground, no problem. Also, I could separate the slips further to have more plants, but as I know this is a vining plant, and as long as those vines get contact with fresh soil, they are going to root in multiple places and create more sweet potatoes for me. So I'm just gonna plant the whole thing and not worry about it. These two guys are the reason why I've waited this long to do this portion of this video, and that's because I didn't really see much going on and I was a little concerned. Now, I did change the water frequently, not daily like I probably should have, but frequently enough. And I did notice that these two were starting to create kind of a slimy substance around the potato that was submerged in the water. So each time I changed the water, I made sure to rinse that away, rinse out the glass thoroughly, put fresh water and put it back in. I didn't see any mold, it was just that weird slime. So this was my full potato. It's got just some little tiny roots. So I'm gonna go ahead and plant it and hope for the best, but I'm not really too worried about it because I know that this step that I did, soaking them in water, really isn't necessary. I could have just planted the potatoes in a nice, rich soil environment as long as it was warm enough, because sweet potatoes are warmth-loving plants, and they would probably create slips on their own. Then today, when I was rinsing out this, which if you recall, is the other half of this part of the sweet potato, I noticed something, and a little light went on in my head that if this part was the rooted part, then that means the bottom of this one was actually where slips would normally be produced. So when I pulled it out to wash it off, what do I have right here at the very bottom? A little tiny slip. And the reason why it's so small is because it was in the water. It was far away from the light, and that's why it didn't produce. But I do have roots coming out from the sides, so I'm going to plant this horizontally so that way that slip won't have much room for it to go up and get some sunlight and be happy and grow me some more sweet potatoes. Okay, so it's been a little over a week, and these are our specimens ready to get planted into our raised garden bed. I'm going to start with the carrot. As you can see here, I have some little tiny green parts coming out at the top there. Hopefully you can see them. So I'm going to go ahead and plant this, but I really don't have much hopes for it. Now I'm planting it, I'm just going to dig a little hole in the ground, like so. I'm going to place my carrot down there and then fill it in. I'm going to leave just that very top so that if those little green parts do grow, they'll be able to get sunlight right away. Next up is my lettuce. It started to create this lovely little crown, which I've always seen when I've tried to grow lettuce, but if you see farther down, it has got some serious rot going on, and even the top leaves are starting to get wilted inside. So I'm going to plant this, but I really have zero expectation in it taking off. So for the lettuce, I let the top portion stay above ground and that solid core go into the dirt. Next up is my cabbage. As you recall, this was a red cabbage and it is sprouting all over the place. Even though our cat Knox got a hold of it and decided it was a yummy snack. Don't know why he likes cabbage, but who knows. I do see when I pick this up, there is some rot, particularly on this side. But if you look on this side, you can see some little tiny roots coming off on the bottom edge there. So I'm hoping that those take hold and that rot doesn't affect the rest of my plant, though that whole side is kind of sad. So I don't have strong hopes, but I do have some hope thanks to those roots that I've started. And for the cabbage, I just kind of loosely set it in the dirt, so just a little tiny bit of the base, particularly where those roots were, are submerged beneath the dirt line, and the remainder of my cabbage is above the dirt line. I also made sure to place it near one of the outlets of my drip line, so that way I can make sure it gets nice and watered every day. Next up is my celery. This is the one that you saw me working on in the video, and this is one that I had a fresh celery that I went ahead and added to the bunch. As you can see, they both have some great greens coming out of the center portion of both of them. Let's see if they have any roots. Ah, look, we have roots on our original right there with very minimal rottage. It looks like there's some in the core right there. A little bit on the edge, but nothing that I'm too concerned about. Let's see if the newer one has any roots. Maybe, but nothing as evident as the first one. So I'm gonna let this one sit in the water a little bit longer. But I think that one little part might be a root. So as you can see here, I planted it and I made sure to compact the dirt nicely around it so it won't flop over, since just that base is under the dirt. And I also positioned it next to a drip line. Last but certainly not least is my allium collection. As you can see, I just have a mess in here. So let's start with the garlic. You can see it has a lovely root base and it's already sprouted out the top. So I'm going to go ahead and plant that, and I'm going to have the dirt come all the way up to here at the top of my thumb. I'm going to find another drip line outlet and plant it next to that. I am pressing the soil around it to make sure it stays in place, and I have my drip line outlet right here, so it's next to it so I can make sure it stays nice and watered. And then there's the scallions. As you can tell, these are growing nicely. They all have good root growth. They all have good leaf growth on the top. See, they're all good. So I can go ahead and plant those. I can plant almost all of the white end, probably to about there. I'm gonna go ahead and show you what that looks like once they're planted. Here are my scallions placed in the middle here. Alliums in general don't like to be waterlogged, so I might actually move that garlic towards the center so it doesn't get too much moisture. Last but not least is my onion bottom. Unfortunately, this little guy has had a rough life. The cats kept messing with it. It was looking pretty sad, and it is still looking pretty sad. But at one time, one of those center parts started to produce a little sprout. I think the cats did it in, so I don't think it's going to do anything, but I'm going to plant it anyway because, you know, it doesn't hurt. And we'll see if anything happens. I will say that if you're attempting to grow an onion from scrap like this, I would probably give it more material to work with than what I did, because as you can see, lots of the material shrunk away from the original cutting, and I think it was using up the resources left in that cutting, and I didn't have enough to keep it thriving well. So remember our potato and our piece of ginger. We're going to plant those here in this raised garden bed area here. And you can see right there, and farther up, and an even more mature one right there, those are also potatoes that I grew from the same type of situation. A store-bought potato that was already showing sprouts. So I'm just going to go ahead and find this empty area here. I'm going to dig down with my hand. About so. Place my potato with the sprouts pointing up, and I'm going to cover it up. Now, if I feel like that isn't deep enough, I can add a little bit more soil. But I'd like to have the potato covered, but some of those sprouts to be peeking out, so that way they can see the sun and they can go ahead and start growing. Now, because of our ginger is going to grow from these areas here, I'm going to lay it horizontally flat like this over in this empty section. I don't want my ginger to be too deep and the hole, but I do want it nice and covered up. Remember, it's going to be laid flat like that, so that way it can continue to grow that way. And that's why I have it pointed towards the larger end, where its butt end is here at the end of my growing space. And now that I got everything covered up, I'm gonna go ahead and give them a nice water. And pretty soon, our new potato should show signs of growth such as that. All right, I'm out in my raised garden bed. These are the sweet potatoes that I planted earlier that was just a trimming from the vine. So as you can see, sweet potatoes are really easy to grow. Here are my sproutlings that I created. They have gone ballistic because I waited a little bit longer from last time I was with you to make sure that the weather was warm enough. Now, because I already have sweet potatoes planted here, I don't want to use my trowel because there might actually be sweet potatoes in that dirt. So I'm just going to use the tools that I was given, and that's my hands, to just dig down in here and see what we got. Oh, you can see this dirt is just lovely, rich, loamy dirt. This is perfect for my sweet potatoes. I'm just gonna take this guy. This is the one that sprouted from the bottom. It has grown so much since last I showed you that I don't have to plant it sideways anymore. I can just bury it in there. So I'm gonna go ahead, lay him on the side, dig some more here with my hands. Oh, this dirt is so great. I don't know if you can see this, but there's actually some mycelium growth in there. That means that this dirt is super enriched. This is perfect. And I'm just gonna put it right in there and then bury him up. And I'm gonna go ahead and do that with my other sweet potatoes. And then I'm gonna make sure to water this really well. I wanna make sure that any air pockets that I created by digging and burying them in there are filled. And I wanna make sure they have a good drink so that way they can get to growing. Over here, you can see our white potato bushes are huge. Look at them. They're just so big. And I know, like here, you could already see some of the potatoes sticking out. Now, this is not good. You don't want them to get green like that. They turn green when they are exposed to sunlight. So I might want to fill this bed with more dirt. I can even see a little tiny potato sticking out here. So I might need to add some more dirt to this bed, and that's perfectly fine with potatoes. You can bury their stems, and that is just perfect because that'll give them more opportunity to grow more potatoes. So I think that's what I'm going to do here because I don't like seeing these that are turning green. Let's go to our other bed and see how our other vegetables are coming along. All right, so we're over in our other raised garden bed where we had planted our other vegetables, and as you can see by all this growth, a lot of stuff has happened over here. This is one of our cabbage plants. It's growing really nicely. I don't see any heads forming, but it has some really good leaf growth. And you can just trim some of those larger leaves off and eat them just like normal cabbage. Our scallions are huge. Look at these guys. They're beautiful. I can go ahead and trim these greens off and use them in cooking as they are. I see some of them. Look at this one. Let me put my finger in there and you can see this is getting really thick, so I might let it go and see if it's actually going to create a bulb for me. I don't know what variety of onion this is, so we'll keep a lookout on that. This other cabbage, this is one of the first ones we planted. It is huge, but it's doing something particularly interesting. It is bolting, and that means it's starting to create a flower head. So I can let that go to seed, save those seeds, and plant them again next fall so I can have my own free cabbage seeds. Check out this celery. This is looking so happy. And remember, that was just from that little nub. Look at that. It's great. So I can start harvesting celery and eating celery. Here's this other celery friend. It's got plenty of growth on it. More scallions. They are huge. I think this one is a garlic. I know I had a garlic in here somewhere. It's just chaos garden right now, so it's hard to tell what is what. Over here, we have another cabbage. This one was the white cabbage, where these other ones over here were red cabbages. I have another little tiny red cabbage hidden over here amongst the mint that I have planted. This is going really well.
Some things that you probably noticed you didn't see in here were the carrot that was planted somewhere over here and that sad little head of lettuce. I don't even remember where I had that planted. I'm not surprised that the lettuce didn't survive. As I mentioned before when planting it, I have always had them sprout new growth from the top, but once I've gone to plant them in the dirt, the base has always rotted out on me. So that's something I've never had good luck with. Carrots normally grow really good greens for me, but like I said before, they're not going to grow a new root. So I'm not really that disappointed that they didn't grow, but I would have liked to have something to show you. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If there's other topics you'd like to see on the channel, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time on Plant Life.